Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next edition of Canadian Genius. So, I just finished doing the video on physics and some of those issues, and I hope by that point you guys all kind of realize that there's a lot of stuff yet we don't know. And that was kind of really the whole point of a lot of that, is to get us out of these preconceived notions of what we know and what we hold as solid. Because there's a lot of things that we don't know. There's really a lot more we don't know than what we do know. And one of the ones I wanted to talk about today is about humanity, about us. Like our bodies, the way they work, the way they function, and all of this stuff. And one of the problems that we have is that with science and religion and spirituality, whoever kind of claims something first kind of owns it, right? So we have a world where spirituality was claimed by spiritualists. So spirituality isn't entirely negotiable for discussion in scientific ways because to do so kind of steps on the toes of spiritualists. Religion isn't open to discussion by science because it's religion and is separate from science and all of that stuff. And because of this, we miss out on a lot of things that are staring us right in the face. An example of that is there was a scientist. I was watching another Discovery show or whatever, PBS or Discovery Channel or whatever it was, and they were talking about the study of dogs. And the lady that decided to tackle the issue, to actually go and spend the time to study dogs, was so ridiculed for doing so that she almost stopped multiple times. But now that her studies are more complete and we understand so much more about them and their interaction with humanity and what it all means, everybody celebrates her for doing so. So that kind of proves my point about that popularity issue with science in general. But she took on a task that was so common that everybody thought it was worthless. But just because it was common, it taught us so much about ourselves, learning about dogs, that it was immensely valuable. And we got to learn more about our relationship with other species and how other species have evolved to interact with us. And one of the very fascinating things about dogs is that they've evolved kind of a alternate personality just for us, right? They're the only species that have done this. Right? So if you look at dogs, the way they interact amongst each other is different than the way they interact among humans. Because through hundreds of thousands of years of mutual evolution, we've kind of taught them how to do a bunch of this stuff. Now, on that, one of the theories of humanity's development that is most prevalent at the moment is that our brains became the way they are because we started eating cooked food. Right? If you're eating raw food, like looking at our our primate ancestors and primitive primate currently, they spend a massive amount of time eating, of just chewing to get nutrients because they have to break down these really tough things like roots and sticks and all this kind of stuff, right? Like if you look at sugarcane, it's really tough and hard and it takes a lot of chewing to get the stuff out of it, right? Sugar is readily available because we process it. But our ancestors didn't have a lot of that process, so they had to do all that chewing just to get nutrients. But when we started to cook food, it unlocked a lot of those nutrients because it made it easier to digest, easier to break them down and get access to them. And so it's the process of cooking food that allowed our brains to become as big and massive as they are compared to the rest of us. And I think that has a direct element with dogs. Because what are we doing with them? We're feeding them cooked food, right? All dog food is cooked in some form or fashion. So they get the maximum nutritional value with the least amount of physical effort of chewing and digesting. And so what a surprise that they've evolved this additional capability because we've given them the tools to do so. But unfortunately, it's directly tied to us too, because once we stop, they stop, right? If we stop feeding our dogs, they lose that ability to gain those nutrients in that way, right? And it's not to say that it's going to happen, but it's fascinating that just from something so simple, we've done so much, right? We got this massive benefit, And so did these animals that we've domesticated to be partners with us, right? They've given up a lot, genetically, a tremendous amount, to be sort of subservient to humanity. But the give and take that we've created with them over time is amazing. But we wouldn't have known that if somebody didn't spend the time to research it, right? We wouldn't have had these pieces about ourselves to look at why dogs are evolving that way. Like, nobody that I know of has combined those two theories yet. It's just something that I noticed as I was looking at them. But there's so many things like that out there that we don't want to investigate, right? Because there's political pressure, because there's, don't want that ridicule, don't want that stuff, and we're missing out. A perfect example that I'm sure everyone's now thinking of is pot, right? Is marijuana, because right now one of the biggest issues, especially in North America, is that they're not allowed to study it, right? They're not allowed to study its effects because it is an issue. But at the same token, if we stop and look back at the history of marijuana, the reason it became illegal in the first place had nothing to do with its opioid effects, with its ability to create that high, and had everything to do with the fact it was jeopardizing the cotton industry. And that's stuff you can look up. I'm not going to go into detail on that one. But it was political that it became unacceptable, because hemp was ruining cotton, and cotton was the big money crop, right? So, and hemp was cheaper to make and easier to produce and all this other stuff. And so they went after it in the only way that they could win, by cheating, by going after the seeds, the buds, instead of the product itself. And they've done that with a bunch of things. But if we understand that and get outside of that political garbage and get outside of that, mental minefield of BS that says this isn't acceptable to look at, there's so many things that we could learn. And a big one is how we operate. Right now, we're pretty confident that we know how the body works, but yet every time we turn around, there's a million things that say we don't have a clue how it works. In point of fact, almost every drug on the planet, we have no idea how they work. None. We know they work because evolution of medicine and technology has shown they work, right? All of the medicines that we have all started from plants, because that's where everything started in medicine, right? And that's one of the big issues with rainforest devastation, is that we're losing all of these plants and all their medicinal effects that we haven't yet discovered, because it's the greatest source of those plants in existence. But it all started that way. And then because we learned what was the main ingredient in them, because we investigated them, because we dissected them and learnt and grew and built this knowledge base about what they were, we developed all this other stuff. And then money was involved. And now we make it so that you can't understand all the plant side, because now it's considered foo-foo and inappropriate. And not because it is, but because it messes with big drug companies and their money. The problem is, we also have people that then take advantage of that. And again, are kind of counting on people's stupidity and marketing products that are actually quite harmful just because people think they're popular, right? And once it's popular, people do it because they no longer care what the consequences are. Because, like I said, in celebrity, once these people get involved, we assume they know better because they're superhuman, then they have to be right. Instead of remembering that they're just human and they're just as fallible as the rest of us. They don't know any more than the rest of us, right? And on those same lines, because human has kind of been taken over by the spiritual side, right? We have this whole immense energy system of the body that we can't really study. We know body works on electricity and has all these electrical impulses, but we can't really study the effects because other people like Reiki practitioners have taken over that they have laid claim to it, right? That the more ancient Hindi philosophy of the chakra exists. And so any scientist that really wants to investigate it either does one of two things: ignore it so they don't get ridiculed, or they go and try and study it through things like Reiki or chakra theory and stuff. And of course, they don't work because there's a lot more pieces. Now, I'm not saying that because they don't work, but they don't work that way, right? I myself am incredibly well trained in energetic healing. I'm a Reiki master to the extreme. My knowledge base in energetic healing is immense. I can teach you why it works. I can teach you how it works. That's not the topic for today, though. And the point is that because we get all of this garbage going on, because we get all of this misinterpretation and we don't want to study it, we miss the most basic elements of it. And a perfect example of that is we have all of these healers that claim all of these things, like, oh, I can help you quit smoking and I can help you do all this stuff. And in one time in their lifetime, they came across somebody that it happened to, and they took credit for it. Instead of realizing that it was the other person that actually did it, they were just the ones that helped facilitate it to happen. It's not their credit to have, but they contributed to it. And we can't understand that until we understand that system. And until we understand that there is this whole other layer of life that is sitting staring us right in the face, we can't understand that we're missing it. And that's why we don't understand how medicine works. It's why we don't understand the human brain, right? We know this part sort of kind of does this, and this part sort of kind of does that, but we don't know past that. And it's, I think, very adequately assumed that it's because it's the energy side that's missing, right? We see the physical components and we see that there's stuff going on electrically, but we don't understand it because we don't have any technology that can look at it, right? Like I said before in physics, like if I can't see it, it's not real. And so because we have no technology that can look at the human energy system, well, what about Kirlian photography? It doesn't take picture of the energy system. If it did, I should be able to take a picture of my hand and immediately take another picture of my hand and it be exactly the same or almost exactly the same. And it isn't. That's one of the flaws of Kirlian photography. That's why it isn't typically used in science, because the evidence says something's missing. It doesn't mean that there isn't a technology that could be used. It doesn't mean that there's a better methodology with Kirlian photography that could be used. But because we don't study it, because we're not prepared to look at it, because we're not prepared to put ourselves out there and be ridiculed for even thinking about it, we don't look. But for humanity, that's a bad thing, because we're missing potentially 98% of human life, right? We don't know. And just like with physics and dark matter and dark energy, right? All of our material substances are 98% empty space. It's the same of everything, right? So what is that empty space made of? And why is that empty space different in me, a biological entity, than it is in a rock, right? We're made of the same essential components at the end of the day, right? We're all built from elements and atoms and molecules and all this stuff. And yet we don't know anything about it. We know it's there, right? Because we have names for it, like the spark of life and all this stuff, right? We know that there's a component in it because if there wasn't, we should be able to grow human beings by the billions, and we can't because it's not just a chemical process, right? There's something more. And until we get to this concept that there is something more and we just don't know what it is, we can't investigate what it is. And human energy is a really powerful thing because it gives us a lot of stuff, right? When we look at how we feel, what's the number one measure? Our energy levels. When our energy is high, we feel good and amazing and awesome. And when our energy is low, we feel depressed and down and sad. Why? Because we have this whole other component of life that directly impacts us, but we don't really understand. And then we have all these words to explain it, right? Human consciousness, collective consciousness, the Akashic records, blah, 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 blah. Instead of realizing that those were the theories that were the best understood things back when they were created. The chakra idea was created thousands of years ago and was the starting point of a conversation that never happened because it didn't grow and evolve. All of these treatments that we see, well, this has been used in China for 1,000 years and it doesn't work. We have 1,000 years of history that says it does not work Because if it worked, we would have done it and it would be done, right? Same thing with a lot of things like self-help. Self-help, my kind of joke is that it lives up to its name. It helps the self of the author who gets paid to write the stuff, right? But it really doesn't help us grow and expand as a human. You know, I've written lots of stuff in that world. You know, you can see some of my work that way. But it doesn't work because there's too many elements missing. And the biggest one is permission. Like I said with some of the other topics already, right? And if we don't have permission, if we're not allowed to do that, then we can't see it. Now, I don't imagine I'm ever going to be popular enough or celebrated enough to go to, you know, Stephen Hawking and say, you have my permission to study this in more detail, and it means something. But hopefully other people that do have that background and do have that popularity can do that. You know, the nice thing about everything in humanity is it all starts with one person and one idea. I've said that before. Most people don't get that because we don't see the start. Right? Like I said before, I was talking about Gandhi, and Gandhi is the whole existence of Gandhi. We only see this last little part of his life and forget that he had a whole nother one before, right? He had a whole number of years before he was Gandhi. Even in the story of Jesus, we have this gap between when he was a kid and when he was an adult we know nothing about. And we don't want to know because we want the outcome. We don't want the history. But yet, with a lot of other things, all that matters is the history. So we create a lot of this dichotomy. But if we accept, like I said with physics and other things, that there's a lot more we don't understand, then we can look at the human energy system and go, okay, there is things that make more sense. I personally do think the chakras are something that's legit. I don't think the chakras are chakras, though. I think that much like the heart is the pump of the body, the chakras are elements of the energy system, are pumps of the energy system. What they are is people kind of going, you know, if I kind of feel around in my body, this feels different, and this feels different, and this, for many reasons, right? And have given them labels, have given them purpose, have given them function to justify it. It doesn't mean they're wrong, but it also doesn't mean they're right. It just means that they had a theory. And if we understand that, and we're willing to accept that there's a lot more to humanity than what we know, we can look at that. And the human energy system is one of the things I think that is vital to learn more about, because it is absolutely amazing that I can take somebody and literally, like I said, I'm well gifted in energetic healing, but I can take somebody and within like 5 minutes, I can completely tweak their energy system to make them feel safer, more relaxed, more comfortable, which if we actually look at the studies that have been done on things like Reiki, that's the one thing they have said we can prove, that it creates relaxation. What we don't understand is what the impact of relaxation is on us, right? We haven't spent time to study that because that's getting into the foo-foo side. That's getting into the spiritual side. That's getting into this other stuff that will get ridiculed if we study. But if we don't study it, we literally could be missing up to 98% of what it means to be human, right? We have all these elements that people attribute, right? Well, there's, you know, telekinesis and there's, you know, psychic ability and there's all this stuff. Well, I did a whole entire video channel that comprised of, I don't know how many dozens of videos. It took me a tremendous amount of time and effort to make. And it's all on YouTube. It's called FOPTV, Free Online Psychic Training Videos. And the entire point of the whole videos, nobody gets. Even though I've said it over and over and over throughout the videos, nobody gets it. And you can go watch them. I think last I looked earlier today because I was setting up this channel on YouTube, or the other day, whatever it was. And I think it was up to like 901 subscribers on FOPTV. But nobody gets that the whole point of that was to get rid of the common knowledge so that we could then go up here into human knowledge. We could evolve past all of that stuff. Now, I think the next video I'm not going to be done here yet for a minute, but I think the next video I'm going to talk about is what we consider psychic ability, is that interplay between us. Maybe I could do that here because I'm only at 20 minutes. Maybe that would be a better way to go. I think so. So, to understand more about people, like I said, you first have to be willing to understand more about people. And one of the things that we fail to understand is things like cold reading. Like if you listen to all the skeptics, they'll come in, that's the one thing they go over and over and over and over and over again, gone with psychics, cold reading, cold reading, cold reading, cold reading. And all the psychics are going, no, we don't, no, we don't, no, we don't. Yes, we do. Because do you know what cold reading really is? Observation. That's what cold reading is. That's exactly how it translates. We look, we get observation, we make assessment, which is what we classify as psychic ability as soon as that assessment seems more than what we observe. But it's still observed. The problem is that because we don't know about this potential 98% of humanity, there's massive things we don't know. But yet we do know if we stop to get rid of this foo-foo garbage and science garbage and just go back to humanity, right? We know that other people's moods influence our own, right? If someone's having a really bad day, it brings us down. We take this for granted. Why? There's a whole field of study that needs to happen on that. And just like the study of dogs, the people that are going to do it are probably going to get, ridiculed for doing it. But they're going to end up in the same way. They're going to learn so much more about humanity that everyone is going to look back on them and say, God, thank you for doing that. We are so sorry. We were so stupid. But not until somebody does it. But there's a reason for that. There's a reason we have this idea that mothers have this special bond with children and can tell when they're in trouble. There's a reason that we have this idea that twins can sense each other's moods and emotions from miles and miles and miles away. And it's the simplest thing in the world because we're interconnected, right? That's a whole nother topic I keep wanting to talk about, the interconnectedness of people. That's not the energy interconnectedness. That's the physical interconnectedness, right? And that's a wonderful topic. But I want to talk about this one, the energy side, right? We are all interconnected. And I think, like I said, the chakras are like the energy pumps of the body. Well, I don't know how to define it, but I always use terms like tendrils, like energy tendrils, because we're interconnected and there's a piece of me that connects with you. Like if you like my videos and you're watching them and you think that what I have to say is meaningful and helpful, it creates a connection. We take that, it's like, yeah, absolutely there's a connection. Same connection we take with celebrities, right? That we should own them, but we're connected to them. And that process, I don't know exactly how it works because I have no way to see it. I can feel it in my mind and justify it, but I can't prove it. So I use the term tendrils because I think it's something most people could kind of understand, right? It's just this piece of energy that interconnects. That's a tendril, right? It's like a spider web of energy. And so if we know that this is a possible thing, right? Because we know it's there, we accept it as given that it's there. We just then don't ask further. So if we know we're interconnected and that we have bonded with these people and that we can potentially do more things with them, like how many people finish each other's sentences because they got to know each other? A group of women will always have their cycles round up if they're together enough. Why? There's no internal forces at play, but it's because we're connected. And if you look at it, I think the best way to kind of understand it, which is what most people classify as psychic ability, is that we broadcast vast amounts of information, right? We have some that we take for granted. Facial expression, body language, how well we're upkept, whether their hair is neat, whether, whatever, right? We use all of that information, which is what? Observation, which is what cold reading is. But there's more to it, because when you're willing to be open, but as I kept talking about with self-worth and stuff, and about the male-female dynamic, males are conditionally taught to close off, be unemotional, be detached. Well, how could you possibly connect with someone else when you're being told to be emotionless, to be disconnected, to be detached? And girls, when they are naturally kind of built that way to be open and have emotions, are called, like what I said with Melanie Martinez and what she identifies as in her album, crybabies, which is a bad thing, which is a negative thing, which then causes them to close off and shut down. So because we have this whole society that says emotions are bad, feeling is bad, being vulnerable is bad, we're basically saying interconnecting with other people is bad, which is why we're not connected with them. But in not connecting, we're missing all of this vast information, right? But some of us, like myself and many others, even though a lot of them use the term psychic incorrectly, we have that ability to connect more. Doesn't mean absolute, and it doesn't mean we can read thoughts. I myself read emotion, right? I can interpret a tremendous amount of things from people's emotions, because with the facial expression, body language, all the cold reading observation, as well as that radio input, if you will, my receiver can interpret some of it. It's not perfect, because at the end of the day, we're too different from each other. We share a lot of commonalities, but we all have a different code, if you will, right? It's like two computers trying to talk, like a Mac and a PC trying to communicate. There needs to be something in the middle to make them so they speak the same language, right? We've developed that, but in humanity, we each are our own type of thing, right? This one's a PC, this one's a Mac, this one's an iPod, this one's a telephone, this one's a boat, and we have no way of interconnecting. But because we share so many common elements, we can pick up pieces. And as we pick up more pieces, then we can do more. So to read someone's mind, which is what everybody thinks and imagines, and wow, that's the epitome of it all, I don't think can happen. Because one very important element doesn't exist. And that's our ability to read our minds, right? Because I actually wrote about this a long time ago, that I think, we have the kind of the physical mind, right? Like when we close our mouths and just think, there's this pressure in our head, right? And that's our mind. And then we have this gap, and then we have our unconscious mind. And the more those two are separated, the less the unconscious has an impact directly on the conscious, which is what most people do, right? Close off. Well, what do you do to close off? You get rid of everything else. And that's your unconscious mind that gets pushed back. So for me, like I said before about how my brain works, or actually that one might have got deleted. But anyway, when my brain is on a topic, it's like my subconscious is kind of its own separate brain. And it'll come to me only when it needs more input, right? So it does its own thing, it processes its own way, and I give it the freedom to do so. So I get some wickedly abstract thoughts happening, because there's always some spillover. But that's kind of what I do. But if it's come back and can't find an answer to something, then it goes, hello, I need this, and it will bug the crap out of my conscious mind until I give in, right? And that's definitely not how most people's minds work. But that's how my mind works. And I love it because it takes me to some of the coolest thoughts, right? That's why I can do some of what I do, because I've had a million of those thoughts that are just completely off the wall. And like I said, I think that one got deleted too. I did a whole one on some of this stuff, and I think I deleted a bunch of the best points. But with celebrity and stuff, one of the things that Melanie Martinez talks about is this feeling of insanity. Like she's insane because she has all these thoughts and all this stuff. Like, I imagine half of you are looking at me like I have to be insane too, because I have all these weird abstract thoughts. And when I was about mid-20s, that's what I actually thought. I figured there had to be something wrong with me. I had to be nuts. Because why else would I be so completely different from everybody else? Right? And so I actually went and booked an appointment with mental health and had them kind of look at me. If I've said this before and it didn't delete it, well, you get to listen to it twice. So I went and I had this conversation with this person, and they was there for about 10, 15 minutes, and they looked at me gape-jawed and said, "You're the sanest person we've ever met." And it was devastating to me, because I figured that had to be the answer. But again, because we live in this society that says if you're different, if you're not the same, if you're not conforming to status quo, you're a threat. So I always grew up a threat to everybody's different belief systems. And as I said before, when I was younger, I did have a tendency to trample on those for people. I mean, a bunch of these videos I'm sure are already starting to trample on some for some people. But this is different because it's not about me doing it to you. It's just about the knowledge being out there, and what happens with it is up to you. You have the ability to let me trample or not. So it's important to understand all this stuff, right? And the more that we realize there's so much more out there, the more we realize we don't have to be afraid of ourselves, that there's so much we don't know, that's okay. Because it opens the door to learn more, right? Same exact reason I did the whole video right before this one on physics. Because that's the science that is the thing that leads us to what we know now, right? It's through physics that we're going to learn about the human energy system. It's through physics that we're going to understand time and temporal mechanics better, and speed of light better, and all this stuff, because that's the field that studies it. Provided the people in the field are willing to investigate it, which is the point. And it's not a surprise that they don't want to investigate it when we as a species have this status quo mentality, right? Which is all back to that hierarchical stuff I talked about before. It's like I said, all of this stuff interconnects. It may seem that this is abstract and separate, but it's all connected because that's what we as humans are, right? That radio transmission that we're all sending out happens all the time, right? And there are times when we're more receptive to it, right? Which again comes back to procreation as well. Because if we didn't know that this person was looking to procreate, we wouldn't be able to mate with them. We're one of the few animal type species on the planet. I know people hate that word, but we are. We're animals. We follow under that definition. But we're one of the few that can procreate any time of year. Most have rutting season. And so we can do part of that because we can connect with other people who are on completely separate cycles from us, right? And, you know, guys, everyone thinks, well, guys are ready 24/7, and that's partially true, but not always, right? It's more open than women who have an actual cycle, but again, that cycle is also transferable. If you get around enough group of women and stay with a group of women for long enough time, you all cycle up together. And it's because we're trying to basically be connected to each other. And when we connect, we get things. Which I think one of the things that I'm really interested to find out is how the yawn impacts each other. So if I just go, that's fake. I didn't yawn, I just made it up. But how many people yawned? Why? That's another example of that interconnectedness. There's something going on in that process, in our brain, in our transmittatory system, that sends out a pulse that everybody else feels susceptible to. And you can fight it, but eventually you're going to go, because it just hits us. And I think that's nature's little joke, right? Yeah, you think you're separate? Yawn. And that's a lot of what life is about. And like I said, I want to talk about God, and that's all components of it. But there's so much more to it, right? Life is so much bigger than we tend to realize. Life is capable of so much more. We just have to be willing to listen. We have to be willing to open up to other people. And as long as we say we're not allowed to have emotion, as long as we say we're not good enough the way we are, how could we ever open up? So self-worth is a key to understanding humanity. And it's the key to bettering our lives. So we win when we do it. But the problem is we have this big status quo that says that's not acceptable. That you're not allowed to change. You're not allowed to be different. Because I've put you in this box. And that social contract says you have to stay there. Well, we don't. We have options. So anyway, I think that's enough for this topic. And I am going to take a bit of a break. And then I'm going to talk, I think, about emotion. Because I think that would be the next best one from all of this stuff to help perpetuate this motion that we're gathering. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.